there are people who are stuck in their mindset, and some people, they think that, okay, you know what, the way that I am, I'm fine, I can't change.
Failure then becomes something which is, again, a positive thing.
You ask yourself, is this something that I would risk my life for? Would I put my life on the line for something like this?
But why isn't it that across the board, the wealthiest people are the happiest people? Studies show us, statistics show us that that's not the case.
So this is our new podcast brought to you by the Review of Religions, and somewhat we're calling it Grow, right? And again, this is not a podcast about botany. A lot of people get it mixed up. Searching podcast names, and a lot of botany podcasts had to do with growing, and so don't want to get this confused.
Yeah, I wouldn't be on that podcast.
Yeah. So again, we're going to be talking about, there's a lot of podcasts out there talking about personal growth, talking about, just a plethora of things to improve yourself. And I don't want to make this, and it's not going to be just another self-improvement podcast.
Yeah.
It's going to be something that is coming from a unique angle with different nuances that perhaps listeners haven't heard of, out there. And we're going to try our best to bring something new to the table and offer a unique perspective that, that is going to help the listeners grow and develop.
Yeah, we're talking about being original, but the first podcast is called Grow, and the first podcast is about growth.
Yes.
So it's really original. We could try to be really, really creative.
Exactly. So, Sarmad, me and you, we're going to be going through the different episodes, and we're going to have a lot of interesting ones coming up. Today, we're talking about, as you mentioned, growth.
Yeah.
So, I want to get into why it's even important to think about that. Why is it necessary for us to be talking about growing and progressing?
I think there's two things, right? Because one is that why do we talk about it? Or the other thing is realizing that we already talk about it all the time. Because in every aspect of our lives, financial growth, right? When you're going to school, you're working towards, developing, building to, into a profession. But it's almost inherent in ourselves and in our world. From the moment that we were conceived, right? We've been growing. And so we were born, we've been growing. But even go further back, ever since, the world was created, right? The world has been expanding, our universe has been expanding. So at every level, when you think about it, there's growth in every facet of our lives and every facet of our existence. So why talk about it? It's just a matter of recognizing what's around us and really tuning into how we can maximize how we're going to develop ourselves and grow ourselves, and then by virtue of that, our surroundings.
Yeah, like you mentioned, since the beginning of time, or I guess not time necessarily, but since the beginning of the mechanisms that brought about life, we've been growing, right? We started off as a single cellular organism, a very basic organism, and now we're very complicated organisms as human beings. And it's really important to really think about growth, because I often think about the example of stagnant water.
Yeah.
And I think that, if you have a body of water that's just still, it's not moving, then what ends up happening is, it begins to fester with, germs and bacteria that's really harmful. And what it's doing is, it's not just, that body of water itself is disgusting, and nobody wants to go near it. It develops this stench and odor that repels everyone. So it's not just, it's not just degrading in itself, but it's creating an environment and affecting others around them. And I think that a human being who doesn't grow or doesn't think about growing or progressing in their lives is similar to that, they don't just bring themselves down. They're just bringing others down along with them, whether it's their family and their friends. And then I also think about, flowing water, and how, in a river moves forward. It's flowing in a direction with a purpose, right? And I love it because I love this example because it shows a drastic difference between the two, stagnant water and flowing water. Flowing water continuously is purifying itself of all impurities, right? And it's, as mentioned, as we know, we can drink flowing water without worrying too much about what's inside, what's festering.
It's the same thing with our bodies, right? If you don't use a muscle, it's going to atrophy.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
So, forget working out and building the muscle, just simply using it, right? If you're going to sit around and be lazy, then your body is going to get used to that.
Yeah.
And then it's going to reflect that laziness, or it's going to reflect that, lack of movement, or lack of, any sort of, uh, you know, using what you have and using your capacities and your faculties. And, studies have shown that for humans, even growth is, connected with our happiness, right? Because we, use the word a little bit, purpose. If you're purposeless, if you don't have anything to do you get up in the morning and you sort of don't know what you're going to do, or like we were talking about before as well, it's sort of tough sometimes when, you know you don't necessarily have like a proper schedule, or you don't have a certain place to go to, or you don't know, like, you don't
Yeah,
have these
yeah,
things mapped out. Then it's tough to sort of get yourself going. But when you have a purpose, right, and you're working towards something, and you're constantly trying to achieve something, then you're using the skills that you have, and you're sharpening them, and you're developing. And studies have shown that that's linked to your overall happiness. So
yeah,
I think those are all things that, everyone wants inherently. You want to become something, you want to do something with your life, you want to be happy. And so all of these things are linked. And so then, if we're talking about going back to why are we talking about growth, it's really to our own benefit to understand those mechanisms and those tools, and really the importance of growth, so that we can recognize it, take it, make it our own, and do
yeah,
something with it.
yeah. And I think it's important to, originally I found it strange that we're highlighting the importance of growth because it's something that naturally, like, everyone wants to progress, right? Everyone wants to grow and get better, but there are people who are stuck in their mindset. And some people, they think that, okay, you know what, the way that I am, I'm fine.
Yeah, yeah.
I can't change, right? And, it's, there's this thing, the growth mindset versus fixed
Yeah,
mindset,
Carol
right?
Carol Dweck came up with this, I think, in 2006. And she wrote about this, where it's like, let's say, for example, there's you walk up to somebody, you just say, you blurt out whatever's on your mind, and you're like, it's just who I am,
Yeah.
right? Those people will sort of speak without thinking. It'll just be like, it's just who I am, right? And sometimes, people just accept, all right, and it is who they are. But then what they're not realizing is the impact that the way that they are is having on other people.
Yeah.
And so the fixed mindset in that scenario is, you walk up and you say, look, this is who I am. This is my intelligence level. I can't do anything about it. It's just, like, what am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
The growth mindset is, okay, let's say you did something, you realize it had a certain negative impact on somebody else or on your surroundings. And then you analyze that, you introspect, and then you figure out how you can develop that and improve that. Right. So this is the difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. And just inherently in describing it, think about how, with a fixed mindset, we don't go anywhere. We don't move anywhere as a people, as a society. With a growth mindset, it's not saying that you need to be perfect. It's not saying that you need to be one of those get up at 4 a.m., get your 3 workouts in, get your 4 protein shakes in, or whatever the case might be, right? It's just this constant desire and seeking to see how you can improve and be better than what you were.
And I think sometimes it's not the person's fault. Sometimes they're given like these innate abilities where they're already good where they are and they feel like they're talented, or they feel like, and there's nothing wrong with them. I'm not taking anything away from anyone. And the example that I like to give about someone with a progressive or growth mindset and how that leads to their success is one of my childhood favorite stories about the tortoise and the hare. And for listeners who aren't familiar, the tortoise and the hare, they get into this discussion about getting into a race. And the tortoise, as we know, is a very slow animal, whereas the hare is inherently and innately very quick and very agile, and it runs very swiftly. So, first of all, in a real world situation, we wouldn't see two individuals of these similar dispositions getting into a discussion to race, anyways. But we see that this turtle agreed, firstly, and secondly, the hare, on the other hand, because of its innate ability to be quick, right? It became overconfident and it ended up losing the race actually because it, went ahead and it took a break and it became complacent, right? Um, uh, because of the innate abilities again. So the tortoise, on the other hand, had this growth mindset. It said, you know what, I can overcome what I've been served with,
Yeah.
whatever's in my plate, right? And he overcame that. And we see that, at the end he came out victorious, and that proves that somebody who believes that they can do better, whether or not, nature, obviously nature plays its role as well, right? We're given certain things, um when we come into this world, whether it's a disability or some other weakness of any sort, right? But the main thing is to go forward in life with a mindset that you can improve, you can grow, and you can progress further.
You can't be afraid to fail.
Yeah.
Right? Because I think that's one of those things where you try to step into something that you're uncomfortable with. Because look, there's two aspects, right? Two key aspects that stand out to me, at least, when we're talking about growth. Is one is getting uncomfortable. You have to get uncomfortable, right? Because it's the same way when you're building muscle, you're breaking it down. It's going to hurt a little bit, but you know you're doing it because it's going to, build something even better. It's the same thing when, you're stepping into an uncomfortable territory. You're putting yourself out there a little bit just to try and improve yourself. And then, like I said, you can't be afraid to fail. Thomas Edison, I think it was something like he failed 1,000
A thousand
something
times,
times
yeah.
before he actually ended up creating the light bulb. What if he gave up at 100 failures, 200 failures, 500,
He
900?
said that each failure was a step towards his success.
Right? Because you can even take your failure as growth, right? Like we were talking about fixed versus growth mindset. Well, the growth mindset allows you to fail, but that failure to be positive,
Yeah.
right? For it to be a stepping stone, for it to be a stepping block. Like you look at athletes and these sports teams who, they'll lose, in the finals or something like that. But then they'll say, look, we can build on this next year, right? So what really, then it completely changes your concept of failure, right? Failure then becomes something which is, again, a positive thing. So growth not only inherently in and of itself yields positive results, but then it gives you a positive mentality as well.
Yeah, and I think that positivity that we develop from growth shouldn't just be limited to ourselves, right? Like growth limited to the person isn't really meaningful because it's almost like a tree that grows its fruit and consumes the fruit itself. It's
Yeah.
not benefiting anyone. It's just living its own like sort of mediocre existence. And we see that a lot in society. We see that a lot of people are just focused on themselves, me. And social media has taught us to like really focus on ourselves and better ourselves in whatever way that we can. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I feel like having a true impact on the world is also important, and growing
Yeah.
that impacts your environment, impacts the people around you is really important. If you look at anyone in history who's left this world, if they were just focusing on themselves, right, those accomplishments, whatever they managed to accomplish in their lives, didn't impact anybody around them. Nobody remembers them. They're forever lost in oblivion.
It's interesting you say that. There's a story that I've heard someone tell, which really resonated with me, which is that there was a village and a young man, he passed away, and when the people in the village went to the village elder to tell him, he was like, thank God he lived a very long and fruitful life.
Yeah.
And they were like, this is an old guy, all right, he's going crazy, it's fine. Then a little while later, an elderly gentleman, he passed away. And so they went to the village elder again, and they said that, informed him that he's passed away. And he's like, oh, he died so young. And he's like, okay, this guy's gone mad, right? He's like this. And then when someone asked, he's like, what are you talking about, right?
Yeah.
He said, what is age? It's more so the impact that you have on the people around you that really determines the worth of your life.
Yeah.
He said the young man had such a positive influence and impact on the people around him that even within, a short span of time, he had more of an impact than that elderly man did, who sort of stayed to himself. He was a recluse. He didn't really do anything for anybody. So when you're talking about purpose, when you're talking about how to, that drive to get you going to grow, like I get it, this whole social media trend about personal growth and all these sorts of things. Yeah, it's fine. Financial literacy, grow your wealth. Yeah, that's all fine.
Yeah.
Like you should do those things. But when I see these things on social media with that same inspirational soundtrack on the,
Yeah.
behind it, it's
It
like,
gets you amped.
yeah, right. It gets you amped up, but then it's like, okay, I'll do that for myself. But does it just stop there? Does it just end there? Because that's not very fulfilling, right? Ultimately speaking, right? You look at the richest people. Why isn't it that across the board, the wealthiest people are the happiest people? Statistics show us that that's not the case. Like people who give back to their communities and to their, society, they're the ones who are more, happy and more fulfilled in life. So if we have a purpose that's driving us to not just benefit ourselves, which we should do, of course, but by extension, using that benefit to help those around us, to build those around us up, to build a society around us, to build the communities around us, then you have more of a reason, more of a drive to grow, to become better. Because now it's just not, you're not the only one depending on it. It's the people around you who depend on it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the thing that you just mentioned about creating that impact. I think it's a good way to measure your growth as well, right? Like we're talking about growth, we're talking about how to um grow properly or grow in a direction with a purpose, and we're going to get into purpose, quite soon. But measuring growth is really important because that sort of tells us whether what we're doing is right or what we're doing is wrong. And I think one way to measure growth is obviously the impact that you're having, but another is also, defining your goals. So a lot of times what happens is when we are talking about purpose and we're talking about growth and improving ourselves, oftentimes we get lost in, different things. So and I love giving this analogy of, going to the gym. A lot of people, not everyone, but a lot of people start off going to the gym because they want to get healthier, right? Or they start a diet because they want to get healthier. And what ends up happening a lot of the times, not again, not to everybody, not to generalize, but they get sort of distracted with, the aesthetics of building a body, or just the culture of it, right? There's a gym culture, so I want to be part of that culture, and they lose sight of what their actual goal was. But that goal or that purpose is what's going to drive them at the end of the day, and it's going to help them measure whether they're actually progressing or not. So it's really important to keep your goal in mind, and the purpose that you've set for um, the trajectory that you've chosen for your
It's important
growth.
because it's like you have a buffet in front of you, you don't know where to start. You got
Yes.
so many options in front of you. It can be overwhelming, right? Like, okay, I want to do this, I want to do this, and I want to do that.
Yeah.
But one thing, like let's say sticking to that gym analogy, right?
Yeah.
You wanna get to working out. You want to be that person that goes to the gym every single day. You're on your stuff. You know what you're doing. But it's hard if you just wake up one day, you're like, all right, I'm gonna go to the gym 7 days a week. Because now what you've done is you set yourself up for failure, knowing that if you're going from 0 to 100 in that quick of a span of time, then you're bound to, have an off day. You're bound to have a day where you're so sore you can't get up or whatever. But if you do something which is more manageable for yourself and gradually, progressively develop to your ultimate goal,
Yeah.
right? And that could even look like, one day where you're not feeling like going to the gym, right? You're like, I can't do it. That day, even if you just get out of your house and drive to the gym, that's a victory,
Yeah.
right? Because if it was something that you weren't able to do before, you weren't going to the gym regularly, just getting up and going, and even if you don't have like a 1 hour long workout,
Yeah.
let's say you get on the bike, you get on the treadmill for 10 minutes. That's 10 more minutes that you were going than you were going to do if you just stayed in bed or stayed at home and you caved and gave in. You're like, I can't do it today. So like these little steps. And when I think about it, it's something that really inspired me, which when we talk about, someone who is regarded as, one of the most influential people in all of history, right? The Holy Prophet of Islam, Muhammad, peace be upon him. One of his key qualities that's mentioned is that every single moment of his was better than the last.
Yeah.
So all it is that you have to keep trying to take one step forward, right? Just like the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, right? Like he had all these difficulties, everything was against him, but he didn't cave, he didn't give in, he didn't give into his circumstances and say, all right, this is too tough, I can't do it.
Yeah.
He just put one foot in front of the next and kept going, right? He kept progressing.
Yeah.
And that's what we got to do as well, right? Like if we want to grow, sure, you might not achieve everything you want. Rome wasn't built in one day. You take it gradually, you take it progressively. Just try to be better than you were before, whatever that looks like for you, for each individual. Don't get caught up in this social media world where it's like, okay, if you're not doing this, and you're not doing this, and you're not doing this, then you're a loser.
Yeah.
If you're not waking up and you're not at this time, you're not working out this many times, you don't have this much in your bank account, then you failed. Don't give in to any of that stuff. The essence behind that is just do better for yourself and do better for the people around you.
Yeah.
And as long as you're doing that, then you're on that growth trajectory, that growth mindset.
Yeah, and you mentioned Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him. And one of the things that's really fascinating is that drive that he had, right? That he was willing to give up whatever he wanted for the purpose that he wanted to achieve. And this is really important. This is why I want to emphasize that having a purpose, right, gives you direction. and it tells you how to, again, how to measure, right? So if we're talking about going to the gym, right? How are we going to measure that? We're going to measure that by like if my goal, if my purpose is that I want to get healthy, I'm not going to measure it by my size or by
Yeah.
I'm going to measure it by variables that have to do
Like
with my
how I
health.
feel, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I'm not going to measure. And then it's going to that's going to tell me what actions I'm doing are right and wrong. And going back to Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, he had a drive that originated from his purpose, right? And this is where I think things get interesting because his purpose was sort of transcendental. Like it had nothing to
It
do
was
with this
beyond just
world.
himself, right?
Exactly.
It was beyond what, like, the things that come and go in this world.
Yeah, exactly. Like beyond the physical, right? And obviously he was connected with the creator of this universe, and that's what sort of when I go back to looking at what my purpose is or trying to find meaning and purpose in life, I go back to my creator, right? Similar to the way that this chair has a creator. Um, Whoever invented the chair knew the purpose for which he was inventing it, right? So I know that my creator has given me a grand purpose that's going to help me get through life, right? And I was reading recently Carl Jung's The Red Book, right? And in it he says that and this is again his magnum opus. He spent like over a decade working on this, and in it he says that to find a meaningful purpose is to find something that you voluntarily sacrifice your life for.
Yeah.
And that's something that really defines what. So if you're searching for a purpose, and if you don't know if that purpose is something that really means something to you, ask yourself, is this something that I would risk my life for? Would I put my life on the line for something like
Because it
this?
comes down to, like, when we're talking about getting uncomfortable, right? Like
Yeah.
you in order to grow, you need to sacrifice. It's sort of just like the way the world works, right? To gain something, you need to give something up,
Yeah.
right? You might have to give up a bad habit in order to gain a good one,
Yeah.
right? So it's these sorts of things. And like you think about the things that people are most passionate about. Like I remember years ago, there was this like viral video of this mom who her kid got stuck under a car,
Yeah.
and she lifted the car to save him, right?
Yes.
Or like was able to like partially lift it just to, where does that come from, right? And this is this is a real true event that happened. How does that happen? She wasn't trying to benefit herself. She wasn't trying to save herself. It was that instinct that was beyond her, right? Obviously, you can't compare anything to a mother's instincts
Yeah.
and love for her child,
Yeah.
right? And it's that instinct that is beyond herself, beyond the mother's self, that enables her to have this, even at times, superhuman strength. And so if we're trying to sacrifice, and if we're trying to really attach ourselves to something, if it's going to be worldly, like if we're going to attach ourselves, if our ultimate goal is just going to be to have that number in our bank account, the ultimate goal is to measure your biceps at the end of the day and have it be, like be a certain like number or whatever it is, right? Or to be a certain weight on the scale.
Yeah.
Then, okay, let's say you even hit that, then what? Right? Let's say you achieve that, then what? Because does life stop?
Yeah.
But then the other thing is, if COVID taught us anything, is that the things that we're used to or the things that we have can disappear in the blink of an eye.
Yeah. The comforts of life can
100%.
disappear. The normalities.
And if you're attached to these worldly things that can just disappear in a moment, then how can you attach your entire purpose to that? But if you're going to attach your purpose to something, to someone who can't disappear, who's not going anywhere, who's always been there,
Yeah.
right? And is sort of like not sort of, but is genuinely the very essence of how and why we're here,
Yeah.
then that is an everlasting purpose. And so if you're worried about that, drive fizzling out, then you won't be, you won't have to worry about that, because your purpose isn't attached to something that can just disappear within the blink of an eye.
Yeah, and I think that when I think about purpose coming from something, again, transcendental, something outside this universe, from God, right? I think about, it always takes me back to that one incident during the life of the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, when, he was offered by the disbelievers to let go of what he was doing.
Yeah.
He was driven by a purpose. They were like, stop doing what you're doing. We'll give you everything you want. We'll fulfill every desire that you have.
And this is after him and his people are being tortured. They're being, boycotted, like everything. Like at that moment, you would think that, all right, you're offering me to give like all I have to do is stop doing what I'm doing, and you'll give me all of these things anyone would ever want.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, and again, that was, it was like we'll give you whatever you wish for. We'll fulfill the heights of your pleasures. And his response was, put the moon and the sun in my hands, and I still won't.
yeah.
Give me celestial powers, and I still won't desist from what I'm doing. So that is sort of the impact that a true purpose and a meaningful purpose.
And that set the trend. That set the trend for his followers,
Yeah.
because his followers are described, right? Because he came, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he came at a time where people were, like the lowest forms of civilization,
Yeah.
right? The stuff that they were getting into is like, like you don't even want to start talking about it. And it's described that he took those people who were wild ones at that time and he developed them into men.
Yeah.
And then he took those men and turned them into men of God.
Yeah.
So this gradual progress that happened, right? And it wasn't like I said, they had to go through, every imaginable struggle, right? The same way you look at in the worldly sphere, right? We talked about Edison and the, stages of the light bulb. You look at, I don't know, flight and planes,
Yeah.
right? Look at the first drawings of what a plane looked like some contraption I would never sit in, right? And now, you don't, without even thinking, you get up and you board a plane, and like there was gradual stages, there was difficulties, there was roadblocks. And if the same thing applies in the world, in terms of these worldly things, then same thing in the spiritual world, right? And so you combine those two and you're trying to attain, that's what one of the most beautiful prayers that I find is, grant me good in this world and in the hereafter. It's not, disregarding one
Yeah.
over the other.
Yeah.
It's saying that you can have both, but as long as your purpose transcends and encompasses both, worlds and both lives that you're going to live, then you can achieve any growth that you want, any success that you want. And again, I know, like, it's tough. Like, we've all been there where it's like, I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I can make it. I don't know if I can achieve it.
Yeah.
Or, whatever you've set out to do. But again, another beautiful thing that I find is that God says, don't despair of his mercy. Don't despair of his power and the abilities that he has. So if you turn to him, even if it's for your worldly progress and your worldly growth, even if it is just, I want to lose X amount of weight.
Yeah.
Okay, work towards it. Put your effort into it. Put your prayers behind it. And then you can achieve that, because of those prayers and those efforts that you make. So again, it's one of those things where it's easy to get discouraged, but it's also easy to see how you can continue to stay driven. Just if you have that underlying purpose and underlying, desire to achieve something that's for yourself, but also greater than yourself.
Absolutely. And I think that, growth, it doesn't happen. I mean, it does happen on its own, but it requires effort, right?
Yeah.
Like you'll be growing in somewhere, from whether it's, you're talking about a physical growth. We're all growing up. We're growing in age, right? But the growth that's beneficial to you comes from effort and planning.
Yeah.
And one thing that I like to do is, one sort of exercise that I do is, I think about, I look at a purpose, right? So define a purpose for myself. It doesn't have to be like a purpose for life. It could be, again, like we've been talking about going to the gym. So it could be something like, I want to get healthy, right? And then I ask myself over and over and try to boil that down. Why do I want to get healthy? And I keep asking myself, and it keeps boiling down to the greatest purpose itself. And you cross-reference that with the actions that you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, are you actually fulfilling your purpose? On the one hand, you're saying, I want to get healthy, or I want to, whatever, become more spiritual. But on the other hand, you're doing things that are not conducive to your growth. You're doing things that are actually throwing you in the opposite direction, right? As opposed to growing. So that really puts it in perspective to me, what exactly I need to do, what exactly I need to improve on.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives me defined steps. So what I would say is, don't take growth and be like, yeah, I'll do this or I'll improve. Like, make a structured plan, really analyze your purpose, and, create an action plan from that purpose, whatever stems from that purpose. And that'll sort of help you.
Self-awareness is a huge aspect of it, right?
Yeah.
Like we all have those things that we need to develop, right? We all need to, uh, not just need to, but we should, right? Continue to strive to be better people.
Yeah.
For the, like, I don't know, it's never really sat well with me, this concept of like I'm happy with where I'm at,
Hmm.
because how can you, like, you're ultimately saying that, okay, there's no, I've reached my ceiling, there's nothing more for me to do, I can't become a better person, I can't do more for other people, I can't do more for myself. I think that there's always, the way that we've been created is there's always room for improvement. And so even if it's like, even if you slip up or you mess up in something, it's just about awareness, right? Recognizing it and then making that firm resolve that, okay, I'm going to change it. It's the same thing with, even in Islamic terms, when we think about repentance, right? That's the key to doing that, is analyzing yourself and recognizing, okay, I probably shouldn't have done that. And then making a firm resolve that I'm not going to do it again,
Yeah.
right? Human weakness is there, and we'll all slip and fall at some point or another. That's just bound to happen because of our human nature.
Yeah.
But if you have that firm resolve, if you have that recognition within yourself that, look, I understand that I can always be better.
Yeah.
And just imagine a society where everyone is trying to become better, not for just for themselves, but for the person next to you, your neighbor, right? Your community, your friends, your family, whatever the case might be. And then all this stuff that we've got going on in the world, right? If you take a step back, we all humble ourselves a little bit and say, look, we can all be better,
Yeah.
right? And we all need to be better. And we always, people will be quick to point the finger elsewhere. But if you just introspect for a second, you know, uh, you know, see how you can develop that, personal morality,
Hmm.
the way that you present yourself to others, how you carry yourself.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, you have to introspect. You have to look inside yourself, and not like at the end of the day, I think it's a really good exercise, and we're nearing the end of our
Yeah.
first episode as well. So, um, to introspect and to really, as you mentioned, look at yourself, but not beat yourself up. This is what I wanted to emphasize.
Yeah.
That don't beat
Yeah.
yourself up. Obviously, everybody makes mistakes. Everybody, whether you're trying to grow and you fail once or whatever. Like we mentioned Thomas Edison again and
Yeah.
again,
Yeah.
that he failed many times, but he didn't classify it as failure, right? He classified it as steps. And even if you have a plan and you have a plan that, okay, for the next few days I'm going to do this, and maybe one day you miss it, right? Compensate with something, but don't beat yourself up
Yeah.
for it,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
have a progressive mindset that
It's all about perspective. It's all about perspective. Like, finding the silver lining in things. Like, some people are better at doing that than others, or it's like seeing the glass half full, right? Those sorts of things, where it's just, sometimes it's just, about the switch of mentality. And another thing, just, your company, the people that you're around, surround yourself with people who are like-minded, who also have that growth mindset, who are, not only trying to become better themselves, but, they'll push you to become better as well. Like, they'll hold you accountable, they'll hold you to a certain standard. Just being with people who are good, virtuous, righteous people, right? Who are positive people, right? Just, good people, right? So I think all these things combined, and just having that right mindset, introspection, get uncomfortable, and don't be afraid to fail. All these things set you up automatically just to be on that trajectory of growth.
and I know I said that this podcast is not about botany, but we know we're all little seeds. We all have the potential to grow within us, right?
Yeah,
Within our, our being. And so we just got to find that water, that sunlight, and that fertilizer to like really help us. And so I think this sort of sums up really well what, what this podcast is sort of going to be about. And also like, I guess it was a good start to, the first season, and we're going to have a lot of interesting episodes coming up, a lot to do with building yourself up and just bringing new things to the table. We've heard so many things over and over, but bringing a new perspective that's unique, and I promise the audience that it's going to be worth your while. It's going to be something that at least you'll learn something, because during the course of preparing for this, I learned many things. So
that's the thing. I think the great thing about this podcast is we're not like experts or anything, but it's like we're growing at the same time, 100% pun intended, to, ourselves learn and get better. And like the whole point is that the audience can like sort of do that along with us. So it's all this like, joint effort to
yeah, absolutely.
increase
I'm
and
looking really
get
forward
better.
to keeping this conversation going. But I for now I think this is a good place to to end the first episode of Grow.